The Wall by Jean-Paul Sartre, um, Jean-Paul Sartre, if you're going to say it the full French kind of way, is a collection of five short stories that kind of cohesively fit together under a similar theme of existentialism, I'd say, maybe, I guess. Um, like it, in like one of his other works, like he says existentialism is a humanism, is a nice short little uh, pamphlet, I guess you'd call it, about how um, it's not that existentialism was kind of being correlated, lumped in with like nihilism, and he was trying to like make sure like people are like, it's like actually not, because it actually makes you adopt like responsibility and like a way of viewing the world that's like um, not truncated or kind of padded up with all this like kind of dogma. So I think in these short stories, I think in the Wall he um, actually successfully than his debut novel, Nausea, where Nausea was kind of like a little bit stilted, I think, and got like kind of mixed reviews from a lot of people. That at least I heard, on account of just the style or just kind of like the narrative device used alone, just kind of using that first person kind of narrative and having this guy going from one Parisian cafe to the next, kind of just like looming and just kind of cyclical type bouts of just not, which I get. I totally get that as somebody who's kind of prone to get angst myself. I understand that, but not for there's. I don't think many people who they might not have fully identified with what that kind of um, what he was going for exactly. Like he was trying to paint a picture, like which is kind of, I guess, would make people understand because of how bleak that is. It's like how when you try to see like the great tragedy of existence itself, like being thrust into in Dasein, I think is the German word Heidegger used a lot. Although I think maybe Hegel might have used it too, actually. So, but that's a whole entire other video. For now, I'm just going to try to focus on The Wall, which is the title of the titular story by. Well, I only brought up the nausea because that I think this was there's a lot more movement going on. Like there's a lot more variation, characters, and different things rather than just kind of like one kind of solidified point of view, just like wandering through, kind of unchanged by the circumstances around him. But so the Wall is different in that respect, and it's basically it's taking part in like the late 30s, so it's kind of, I presumed it to be right around kind of contemporary times. I mean, this short story probably was like published in that year actually that he wrote it, so he must have probably wrote this really quickly, which is impressive. Um, but yeah, he this a group of men are being condemned to death by like during the Spanish Civil War. So yeah, this would have been like 1930s, and they're all being like all the various kind of military forces that are vying for power, and like there's like nationalism and all sorts of like intrigue of um, seizing power and all that kind of coups and stuff that I'm not entirely. I did read George Orwell's Ode to Catalona, I think it's, or Catalona, yeah. Um, Nice, pleasant little country, yeah. That that right near on the brink of like the Pyrenees and France and mountains and everything. Like once you get past all that, just judging from my traveling, it's actually quite pleasant, and yeah. But that's a different story for more for a different day again. But anyway, so yeah, the basically it's like the title is basically talking about the wall. Of which prisoners are used to be executed on. Like it's like right behind the wall. That's people are all the prisoners at their very last moments are emptied of all their belongings, stripped of everything, and like they're. It's like, and I love how Sartre makes it kind of up in the air of like what happens. Like it's ambiguous. Like he's like, okay, lay all these prisoners out, and all the prison guards are and one by one they all have in classic kind of um, existential fashion, like you, or kind of in a way that made me think of like Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. Like they all, each character that throughout this is like a kind of Solzhenitsyn did this too, especially like in One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. He had like Ilyushin the Baptist, and he like signified like faith in the eye of absurd, tyrannical regimes that, and likewise like there's different characters that, I think there's two or three other characters that are in prison as well, along with the main character, and they all have their little quirks in different ways and ideologies and the way they think, um, and how they react to death. And some of them are like, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for death because I'm a political firebrand all my life. This is what I'm doing, and that's kind of what happens too. Like in the, I think I'm not sure if I did No Exit, or like the great Hell is Other People, because that has some great different, like similar, like more obviously dramatized. These are the list of plays. I think the version I have has about No Exit and like other plays, so it's like about four or five other plays, I believe. One of them, which is I think is called The Respectable Prostitute, which I'd like to review all those eventually, but right now I'm focusing on his novels. So and yeah, so there's different, yeah, they all each have their own kind of reaction to death, and I guess the narrator himself is probably like a little less ready. He's like, I didn't really expect to actually be like, it's like, oh crap, kind of moment. I didn't actually expect to be thrown into this place, and to be meeting my final hour, because, um, but that's the absurd. Like that's how like life works often. But yeah, there's he speaks from experience, Sartre, because he was a part of the French Resistance, and kind of, and he dealt with Nazi occupied France, and had to walk on eggshells to make sure like he was getting stuff, along with Albert Camus. With like they both had to, despite their differences, like kind of work together in that respect, and um, they both dealt with, I think in real life he did deal with imprisonments too, and being and the fact that, um, sure, hell was other people, but he's also um, like very relieved the fact that there might be one other prisoner, just like giving him somewhat comfort, like in those hours, and like the fact that hell isn't always other people. So that's an interesting outlook, I think, somebody put on the whole thing. But uh, so the main character is actually is temporarily spared from death, and is kind of held up in the air. And then you have another one called The Room, or Les Chambres, um, which is concerns a couple, one of whom, the wife, is a sickly, bedridden, and is nearing death, and he Sartre keeps the illness like unspecified, and basically it concerns like a lot of different dramatic, um, converging different uh, things going on, all like that are all brought to the surface, I guess, in these kind of darker days. And like the husband ends up like cheating on her, and there's talk of her being sent to an asylum possibly, and it's like kind of everything's up in the air. And then there's lots of like signs of dementia, I think she's showing, yeah, hallucinations and all that. And it's just like, I think this is one of more of his like um creative kind of writing. Just he's going all out, just like like what's possible. Like it's still in realism. It's still kind of realistic. It's stuff that you could imagine happening, but it's all like very, like I think this is the most he these like this idea of like insanity, and like what is it like to actually experience it, kind of the throes of insanity. But yeah. And then the next one is called Aerostratus, or Aerostratus, and it's about this guy who walks around, and he's trying to appeal to this god, or to this I think it's the Emperor Herostratus. I think the Roman emperor from like the 500s, I think, and he AD, I think. But I'm gonna have to brush up on my like early Roman to, well, history in general. But yeah, like definitely antiquity is like something I'm like very like, was it, like Plato is like 300 something BC. I'm not sure, um but yeah, basically this guy is walking around, and he's like, well, in order to actually, he thinks that in order to actually marker his legacy on the earth, like he needs to kill somebody, or he needs to commit like one bad wrongdoing that's purposefully. So he gets himself a revolver, and then this is probably his funniest one because it's so dark and wry. And he's like, he keeps his revolver like kind of like closed in his trench coat, and then he just walks around and he's just like catalogs all these different interactions, like how powerful he feels like just walking around. And he's like, oh, the how people, like how at any moment I could just take it out. And but he doesn't. I don't think. I think he flirts with the idea. But this guy is just totally off his rockers of it, which Sartre tries to make obvious. He's like walking around and he's like, I think it, he's Sartre is painting the picture of like what it's like when a man's whole object, is changed with the introduction of something else, like a some tool or something like that. Like I think it's like you're given some, like with possession, like he talks about this in being and nothingness too. I think in more detail, but he paints a picture here like in a really realistic kind of way. It's like, well, this is what it might look like as somebody using that tool. Like all of a sudden, like power is in the hands, like that kind of thing. And it's like it really did seem like it was kind of like a marker on like how, I guess, like how an on power and assumption of power and how people use, like, and how even like with wars and stuff that seem to be getting more and more technologically advanced, like the Cold War too. It was always a battle of who had the bigger, like who had the bigger, WOD, or weapons of mass destruction or whatever, and like how the nuclear advantage that they had over the other one, like just like petering out just a little bit more, like who was like edging one out. But yeah, and then there's intimacy, and then it's with a young woman who decides to leave her husband, and then this one was a little bit hard to remember. I think there was like this young lady, and then she's thinking of cheating, but then there's one of her friends assures her that in order to remain authentic, like you don't have to do, because it's resulting anxiety, the Kierkegaardian, the existential kind of angst that comes from this indecision of like there's so many different things, like there's so many different possibilities that to mine from, like what you could do, like in the near, not just the near future, but like everything. It's like how everything's tied together, and it's like I think like suffering from that can make you do something, even if, which I could relate to, because like I felt like when I was younger, I was more pressured to choose a job that I didn't really like just in order to kind of do something and be like, rather than contemplating the nature of like what the vocation I chose. So yeah, that one was I really like that one too. And then there's the Childhood of the Leader, the final one, which is about a young man he tracks it from his like toddler age, around the age of 4, to adulthood, and then he goes off on this huge tangent about like Freudian, maybe not tangent, but like the whole thing I guess entails Freudian psychoanalysis, which was totally in vogue at the time. And I think even Freud was still alive at this time too. I think he died like early 40s or something. But yeah, his whole career and all the Adlerian kind of schools and Jungian and and all these, or Otto von Rank I think too is like big kind of early proponent I think of Freud. So yeah, a lot of these people like who went off the deep end with psychoanalysis and just like how far like every look like observing every single angle of everything and seeing like and thinking that somehow you've cracked the code just because you've like, oh, you've attributed that behavior to like repression or childhood youth or pederism, and that's what happens here is like the young guy is searching for meaning. Pretty much he's just trying to find out what he wants to do, and he's like, well, maybe I want to be an artist. So there's a bit of a he's like, they mentioned Rambo too, like Arthur Rimbaud, with that similar kind of thing with Rambeau's homosexuality being put on to be as kind of a analogy to like what he was feeling, because there was like homosexual tensions, not only just, but it was like actually written like right out. It was just like, okay, so like, yeah, this is the way that this older psychoanalyst guy feels about this young student guy, pupil, almost like in the way. And it's just like really, it's coming from a point of view where Sartre's like, you can tell he's like kind of wryly, tongue-in-cheek, just like mocking some of him seems like he's mocking the whole idea of psychoanalysis, which is understandable, because I guess like it's not exactly maybe overlapping with existentialism in the way that maybe he'd hope. But yeah, there's a lot of just like really kind of really interesting kind of divulgent like just like this idea of like some guy just like creepily like just tell me about all your fantasies, all your darkest thoughts and everything. And it's like, well, you have to get to the bottom of what this person's feeling, right? And that's like, it makes sense, but at the same time it's like also just like an indication, or it's a great, there's like a great amount of like needless sorrow and pain to take from it too, because people end up um overly overly analyzing, I guess, just things that aren't necessarily there, or like, oh well, that's because you're reading, yeah, like at the end of it it's like about, he's basically a poet at first, like in the style of like Verlaine, Paul Verlaine or Arthur Rimbaud, and but and then he becomes like a fascist youth, and then there's also him reading I think it's like is it Balzac's whole comedy, the human, I think it's called the Humane Comedy, or Le Hume. Um, and then he's like, yeah, there's also a part where he like randomly just like assaults a Jewish guy, and it's just like out of. So I think what it's doing is like it's the anti-Semitism, yeah, everything's on there. It's just like you can see like starts like trying to list every single kind of trope that he saw like going that were really happening too, like just how people, and itself felt to me like this young man was doing all this stuff almost because out of as a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, because he was like lacking meaning is doing this stuff. So in a way he was actually being inauthentic, because he was like, oh well, psychoanalysis tells me all this stuff, like if I have these homosexual tendencies then I must be a part of this poet community, and then poetry, and then that also stems from that to fascism, so I have to yeah, it's an interesting way that how Sartre kind of very measuredly kind of take shots at all these different people without like just outright saying psychoanalysis is crap, or bonkers, or so yeah. Jean-Paul Sartre's The Wall, definitely recommend, definitely probably more so of a more eventful read, I'd say, than I'm sorry, Nausea. And yeah, like I said, I'd like to review more of his plays, and let me know what you think. Thank you for watching.